Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Tonight's topic is going to be nonprofit advocacy, something I'm incredibly passionate about and something I do quite regularly with a lot of organizations around Northern Virginia and around Virginia. My first guest tonight is Mary Agee, and a lot of people will know Mary from her leadership at Northern Virginia Family Service for 4 decades, actually. So thank you, Mary, for joining me.
Thank you, Catherine.
So we're starting out this show with you, primarily because I really want to talk about what you have learned about advocacy as a nonprofit leader, starting back in the 1970s, and right up to the time you turned the reins over to Stephanie Berkowitz. Mm-hmm. And let's start by kind of defining, because I always do that on the show, what is advocacy and how is it different from lobbying, which is something that scares 501c3s?
Well, advocacy is about being the voice for in our situation with nonprofits, for our consumers who may not have a voice in the whole system and developing policies. But it's actually not different from lobbying in the activities.
Okay.
Advocacy is about education of elected officials. It's about, or the general public, it's about presenting different perspectives and asking for change if necessary. And with lobbying, that's simply an IRS status for people that is their occupation, that they're going to do that, and they're going to represent a very defined niche or company. So in essence, the word lobbying scares people, but when we're advocating, we're essentially doing the same thing. We're having conversations with people, we're presenting data, we're presenting a position, and we're trying to influence them to think differently about different areas.
And I think that's very important because I think there's a lot of nonprofits, some of them all volunteer organizations, for instance, that don't think that they have the bandwidth or the resources or that it is part of their core mission. So a lot of people, so Northern Virginia Family Service provides a lot of services. I mean, you do Training Futures, you have acquired other nonprofits in Alexandria, serve in Manassas, and you are directly providing services and supporting people in numerous ways. So I know through working with various organizations that some organizations either think we are too small to do this, mm-hmm. or they have a board that says that's not a core activity mm-hmm. or a core mission. And how do you react? How do you respond to people who say, well, we can't do that, or it's not a core mission, or we don't have bandwidth?
Well, I usually say, number one, that the single most important thing that distinguishes a nonprofit from the for-profit is the mission and the mandate that you advocate. Any executive of a nonprofit that says to me, I don't have time, I usually say, I really appreciate that because we are all in very demanding jobs, but when you accepted the role as a leader of a nonprofit, you accepted a mandate to be able to be that voice. And in fact, that's what strengthens not only your organization, but strengthens, obviously, the community.
And so going back to how you started out, and I know that you have strong relationships with policymakers at the state level. Mm-hmm. You know, I know that you and Jerry Connolly go way back, you know, with the Board of Supervisors in places where you may have, whether it's Alexandria or Manassas, where you may need local government support for what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Building those personal relationships, you know, now we tend to do a lot of things digitally, you know, a lot of social media or emailing or even a lot of phone calling.
Right.
But how important is it for a nonprofit leader or even board members, I would say, mm-hmm. to build those relationships?
It's everything. I often say to my colleagues, you need to be looking at every policymaker in the same way that you do your most significant major donor. You need to develop a relationship. You need to thank them for their service. You need to educate them provide them with information about what's going on in the community and with people that you're seeing. And maybe once a year you ask for something. But it's a relationship of an information exchange. We have something that we see about the homeless that we need their attention on, but they need to know that so that they can make the right policy decisions. But relationships are everything, because people are only going to pick up the phone or return an email or let you in their door if they know the person on the other end and they value what you are going to bring.
So it's worth investing some resources and staff and bandwidth into doing this kind of advocacy work.
Absolutely.
So what about boards?
Boards are essential because those are the volunteers that are supporting the organization, and frankly, elected officials, policymakers prefer to actually see the volunteers because in some ways they will say, well, they have no skin in the game.
Right.
Mary, you get a salary to do this. But they don't. They authentically, not that I wouldn't authentically
Right.
believe in what I'm doing, but they authentically, as volunteers, are out there giving up of their time to see them. When board members would go with me to Richmond and walk around General Assembly, boy, I tell you that many of our representatives paid attention and they enjoyed talking with them and learning about them and appreciating that they gave up a day to come down to Richmond.
I do think it is an information exchange, and I wish people would look at it more that way, because I think it's less intimidating to walk into a legislator's office and say, let me explain to you about child care regulation. Instead of saying, we need you to support this bill, and we're trying to get your vote right now to support this piece of legislation that we're to go in. And I did this with Child Care Aware Virginia last year, because I had the relationships, but I was not the subject matter expert. So I went with these young women who could better explain the statistics and the jeopardy and the problem. And we ran into very informed people who weren't informed about that. And so how do organizations decide how they're going to inform, what they're going to inform, and how they're going to go about building these relationships? I mean, do you have a sort of a template or something where organizations can get started?
Well, I think the first thing people need to understand is it's the impact of the voice is stronger with more voices. And so I always believe the best thing to do is to link arms with other groups around similar. So you'll see child care advocates coming together, homeless services coming together, whatever, or people who operate shelters or disability networks. If you can work as a network, it makes it much easier. It's more fun.
Right.
But it brings more strength to the table. And that also you help each other in that regard. It's not all on your shoulders. But you can talk about, there's 50 groups in the Commonwealth of Virginia worried about this issue. We see it in every one of our communities. We'd love to be able to sit down with you and share what we're seeing. So my first thing is, don't try to go out there by yourself. Link arms with other groups, especially with people that do have these relationships, which you did. Catherine was perfect.
So tell me, how do we gather? There are so many nonprofits in Northern Virginia, and they're doing important work, really important work, but sometimes what we're doing may be redundant, or it may be in a silo. Is there an organization, a platform, some way for people to understand what other organizations are doing and where the Venn diagram overlaps and they can work together?
Well, that would be too easy.
Well, that's why I'm asking, Mary. That's why you're sitting in the chair.
Some of the jurisdictions in Northern Virginia have regular venues where nonprofits will come together. Not all. And that is a challenge, because there have been efforts to have that network organized in a way that would make sense. But that takes a lot of effort and time. And so right now it's more aligned around interest areas and within jurisdictions. So the housing groups in Fairfax get together regular, housing groups in Arlington.
Right.
I wish it were different, But it is hard, and people will say it's the time. Where does the time come?
That's
the
it. And
challenge.
and I, because I do this show and because I'm a Rotarian, I'm at Guest House, who has a residential reentry program for formerly incarcerated women in Alexandria. I met them at my Rotary Club meeting. So then I was asked to meet with somebody from SkillSource that does job training for underrepresented populations, and I asked if he knew about Guest House, and David was like, no, I don't. I'm like, well, I need to introduce you to Kerri, because this is where I see, because I'm around in different places, seeing how organizations can actually serve the same population, but they don't know each other. And so that's very frustrating to me. Yeah. It's kind of like, I don't know what the answer is.
Well, part of it is, it's sort of like, and I don't talk about duplication in human services, because even with all the groups that exist, we're still
not meeting the need. We're not meeting the needs of even a fraction of the people, really.
And I always have the saying that it's always, I'll get on my soap opera about this, that why are there so many banks? Why are there so many restaurants? And why can't people who either poor or homeless have a choice in where they get services?
Yes.
So I just never use that word duplication.
Right.
But your point is well taken. You get used to working in your own group and area and with the people that you know and trust.
Right. Relationships again.
It's all about relationships. So that it's a tough
It
thing.
is a tough nut to crack, but I think that some of the platforms that people use, and some of them are, hearings in front of the Board of Supervisors, and some of them are lobby days down in Richmond, and those are all very beneficial, and I wish more groups would actually understand the power of that, so they would look into, if you didn't do a lobby day this year, being more prepared, giving enough lead time to be more prepared to do something next year. And so I'm hoping that, as we go forward, we're talking with Kerri Wilson and Lisa Whetzel, and both very active in trying to do advocacy work, is how we can inspire other people and other organizations around Northern Virginia to kind of climb on our bandwagon and kind of join us in advocating for the services or the resources or the things we need to effectively serve our populations. So toward the end of the show, I'm going to bring you back at the end, on the fourth segment. But thank you for setting the stage for us, and we will welcome you back so that we can talk just a little bit more as far as how to and next steps, because we are in session right now, and we still got time to affect policy this year. So let's not think that it's all over. It's not all over. So please join us after this break as we talk more about nonprofit advocacy.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's a matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try.
Only you.
Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about ripped off money. Nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals in the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water.
At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site.
That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff.
You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow! Oh!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent!
Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Tonight we are talking about non-profit advocacy. We are right in the middle of session here in Virginia. Our legislature is in session for 45 days this particular year. And joining me in this segment is Lisa Whetzel, who is the director of Britepaths. Thank you for being here, Lisa.
Thanks for having me.
Full disclosure, I'm on the board of Britepaths, which is why I talk about Britepaths a lot. And I'm bringing you here today to tell us a little bit about, first of all, how you got involved when Britepaths was actually Our Daily Bread, and that was many years ago.
Right,
and your path into this, the work that you do as an executive director now.
Right. So when I became executive director, I got a copy of this book, and Forces for Good. I highly recommend it. But in there, they talk about the 6 practices of high-impact nonprofits. And so when I was trying to get my head around what were we going to do at Our Daily Bread at the time, the 6 characteristics that they named was advocate and serve, make markets work, inspire evangelists, nurture nonprofit networks, master the art of adaptation, and share leadership. Well, that advocacy and serve really resonated with me. And so while we were trying to get our house in order, we dabbled in advocacy. We weren't really on the forefront, not like Mary was describing her experiences. But then it just so happened that our nonprofit was located in a jurisdiction that was experiencing some redevelopments and some tear down of some properties that affordable housing that directly impacted clients that we serve. And so we started to partner with Voice, another advocacy group, and we showed up at a city council meeting, and here I was with Voice advocating for my clients with my board chair advocating. She was hired as a supporter of the developer.
Yeah, one of the development projects.
And so that prompted a really healthy conversation at our board meeting shortly thereafter. And to make a long story short, we created a team of board members to figure out what our nonprofits allowed to do, because it was like what she was describing. It scares nonprofits to get involved with it, and so we developed an advocacy policy, and which is really helpful because not only does it give clear parameters in what I can do as an executive director or my staff can do, but it also what board members are allowed to do. We also developed certain issues that we agreed upon that we would advocate for. So it's not just this issue or that issue of the day. It's something that we mutually agree on, and that's very helpful for me. And then it's also helpful for attracting new board members, because they're not put in that position where they find themselves in a conflict of interest.
Right.
So it's been very helpful in the past couple of years, and so I feel confident now when I go out and I talk about affordable housing, because I know I have the support of the board behind me.
Right, and that was something that we had to work through. So for boards who currently have not considered advocacy for whatever reason, an advocacy policy really is a good place to start. I think it also was helpful that we had Mary come in with a board member.
That's right.
Mary came in with a board member, and they kind of answered the questions of the board and they asked good questions too about describe a situation that really tested your board and really tested your commitment. And they came back with a very good example. And I do think that organizations can reach out to other nonprofits and say, how do you do it? Mm-hmm. Or can you help us? Or help us find a way forward, or something that will work for us.
Right.
I do think that's important.
And I just want to point out a couple other things from this one chapter that I thought was really helpful, because it's another way that I've tried to make sure that we're doing advocacy right. I mean, not only just following the guidelines, but doing it in such a way that you don't lose potential donors or current donors. So they recommend that you balance pragmatism with idealism. So you're seeking centrist sort of solutions and not trying to do something extreme. So the other one is practicing bipartisanship. I think that's really important. and preserving your credibility and integrity. So any kind of facts and statistics and stories that you bring to your elected official, you've got to be credible. You can't make stuff up, and just to fit the conversation of the day. And then they recommend that you hire policy experience, and we haven't ever, been able to afford to do that, but we have board members that can help out in that way, and that's a great resource.
We have places like the Commonwealth Institute, and the Commonwealth Institute, based in Richmond, is a policy think tank organization that does a lot of the heavy lifting on sorting through statistics and creating policy positions, and they sort of are ancillary to some of our advocacy work and the things we do.
Right, and they are so willing to help us to draft opinion pieces or give us the kinds of materials that we need to educate our donors on a certain issue, and they do it, in a very professional way and a way that's very clear and makes it easy to understand.
Right, and and there's also opportunities, and we have had one bubble up sort of because I am interested in the earned income tax credit, and Delegate Kim Plum is putting in a bill around the earned income tax credit, and because they know I'm a very passionate supporter, they reached out to Britepaths to ask what we could provide, because people only need to understand that there are committee hearings in Richmond, and bills don't get to a floor vote unless they can get out of committee. And those committee members, and sometimes there's like 10 of them or 12 of them, they decide. And so testimony or hearing from actual people how they're affected, but where do you find these people?
Right. And so, we were able to email our base of clients that we have stronger relationships with and ask them, are you impacted, and how are you impacted with the earned income tax credit? And so we got a very real story, and I think that you're going to be able to use that. But that is that sort of partnership, though. I mean, I don't know all the ins and outs of committees, and so you were working with the Commonwealth Institute to know, and then
there's a lot
you
of
were able
parts
to
it, but it's coordinating. And I guess that's one of my interests in talking about advocacy work, is that even if you don't feel like you know how it all works or you don't know all the players, finding the people who can connect the players who are all focused on the same outcome. In other words, if we're all trying to help this bill that Ken's got about the earned income tax credit in Virginia, he wants it fully funded, which it's not right now, then if we can get organizations who all serve people, and I would say that a lot of nonprofits, like 100% of their clients probably are eligible for the
human services related nonprofits, right?
Yeah, human services related nonprofits are probably eligible for the EITC, and one of the great tragedies is that not everyone even knows to take it.
Yeah.
Not everybody's even getting the money back that they're entitled to. And so to me, this is like bringing human services focused nonprofits together and helping each other, as Mary said, figure out what the issues are and how we can collaborate on the issues becomes really important.
Right. And so there is actually a new group that is starting to get off the ground. It's called NOVI, the Northern Virginia Exchange Ideas, and it is a group of local human services focused nonprofits, executive directors that are getting together. And so I think that there's going to be more chances in the future to get together and have a stronger voice.
So how would people find out information about that? Because and let's just say, I'll ask you that, and then I'm already down a bunny trail. But there's different levels of nonprofits too. There's bigger nonprofits like Northern Virginia Family Service, Facets, and Cornerstones. There are smaller ones, and then there are all volunteer organizations. Think about the Naomi Project,
right? Or ECHO is another one.
that are all volunteer organizations. They're still doing important work. They are still lobbying, and they're advocating for that. So how can we get the word out to this wide variety of organizations about how they are welcome? First of all, to feel that they are welcome into a group for human services focused nonprofits, and then how would they go about that?
Yeah, well, so anybody can reach out to me. You can find my email on the website of britepaths.org. And then, the county convenes different groups of program managers and case managers and that sort of thing. And so we can try to get the word out that way. But I mean, this is really, I think we've met twice. This Novi group has just met twice. But we're definitely, have our arms open, and we want the smaller nonprofits to come in because I don't feel like we hear enough from them. And so I think it's really a challenge to get them out of their silos.
Right.
And it took us a while.
It did, and I do think having a convening place or having a group, and there was a major organization that was based in Washington that does not exist anymore.
Right.
And so that to me left a hole because there was value in bringing people together, even if it was like 4 times a year for these big, and there were speakers and there was workshops and there were things that built skills and built relationships. And that's the other thing about bringing people together is, Mary was talking about the relationships you build with policymakers at every level, but we need to build relationships among and between the organizations. Like a lot, you run into people all the time, and so you kind of know other executive directors, but there's probably a lot of people who aren't included in a lot of things.
Yeah. And what I hear is, for when I'm talking about advocacy and wanting to get involved, I hear the pushback of, well, my board's not really comfortable with that, and we don't really know what to do, and so I'm very happy to share our advocacy policy that we've developed. I mean, it's not anything that any other nonprofit couldn't use as a framework to build their own, and I think that might be a helpful starting point for those other nonprofits to get involved in that way.
I absolutely agree. And so one of the things about smaller nonprofits too is a lot of them don't have a lot of bandwidth other than their volunteers. And so what would you recommend as far as trying to reach out to their board members to get more involved? Because that's something, as a board member on several nonprofits, I'm very involved. But I'm not sure that every nonprofit or every executive director of every organization is like, come on, board members, get out there and figure out how you can engage at some level.
Right. So I don't really have any strong answers. We're sort of figuring it out as we go along. I think that there are some people that are more inclined and more interested in that, and so tapping those board members. But I was going to say something about that, and it's perfect timing. I can't remember.
Well, save that thought. Yeah. Well, in the next segment, we are going to have Kerri Wilson from Cornerstones, formerly Reston Interfaith. Thank you, Lisa Whetzel of Britepaths, formerly Our Daily Bread. Please join us after the break for more talk about nonprofit advocacy.
There's more than just books at the library.
There's more than just books at the library.
Excuse me. There's more than just books at the library.
Il y a plus que de livres à la bibliothèque.
A lot of great books here today. You know there's more than just books at the library.
I know.
There's more than just books at the library.
I don't want to be hooked to a machine.
I want all the medical treatment available to me.
I wouldn't want my family to have to make this decision.
My doctor knows what's best for me.
An advance directive is your life on your terms. Talk with your family. Decide what's right for you. Then put it in writing.
Documenting my wishes today means my family won't have to make heart-wrenching decisions later.
To learn more, visit www.putitinwriting.org.
1,200 American youth run away from their homes every day. The National Runaway Switchboard is here to help. 1-800-RUNAWAY. If you are a runaway, thinking about running away from home, or a parent or guardian concerned about issues facing your child, call us 24 hours a day. 1-800-RUNAWAY. In times of crisis, hope is just a phone call away. 1-800
Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know now.
Welcome back. I'm Catherine Reed, the host of Inside Scoop. Tonight we are talking about nonprofit advocacy. Joining me in this segment is Kerri Wilson of Cornerstones. And you've been Cornerstones for a long time now, haven't you, Kerri?
About 3 or 4 years.
3 or 4 years.
Rest and Interfaith.
Rest and Interfaith. You know, it's funny because I'm sure a lot of people still have a hard time making that leap. And having gone through rebranding with Britepaths, I can understand how there are probably some people in their mind, but you're Cornerstones.
That's right.
But you have a very long history as an organization, but you actually came from a national organization doing government relations work for the American Cancer Society to take over when it was still Rest and Interfaith.
I did, and it was fascinating because part of the work I did at the American Cancer Society was federal level advocacy and lobbying. We're talking about there as a nonprofit, and the American Cancer Society understood how important it was to work for policy change at the national level. Before their work in doing that, the budget for cancer research was minuscule.
Really small.
There was no focus on women's health or some of the emerging cancers, and so they embraced that. And then when I had the opportunity to come and work in my own neighborhood, of course I was worried. I had a big staff, I had a lot of support, but what I found is that it's so much better at the local level. It's all about the issues that impact all of us as neighbors, as parents, as colleagues at work.
Less ideologically, we all know cancer is bad, and ideologically we all know it needs to be funded. But the issues we deal with, you're right. You see these people, you meet these people, they have faces and names and stories. Your staff are out there delivering services. You know, I think it's very much more real for a community, especially for your donors and your volunteers, to understand that what they're doing, what they're giving, has an immediate impact that they can see.
And it is, I think, so much more accessible. I think, especially now in these times, Congress seems pretty far away, and how you're going to get your message through on the things that we care about. Here locally, you can be involved sitting on citizen task forces, or I can visit my supervisor, John Faust, at Fairfax County, or folks at the state level pretty regularly.
Right, and so Ken Plum, you are lucky. Because you are very lucky, because Ken Plum is the most senior person in the House of Delegates, been there longer than anybody else, and we're fortunate because he is very focused on human services.
Yes, he is.
And he's a very effective legislator. And so having a relationship, describe a little bit of how you created that relationship with Ken.
Well, fortunately, Ken has been working, as you say, for a long time. Our organization is 46 years old, so it existed before I got there. It was a relationship that our board members and volunteers had built. But his background, his experience, and the things we know and care about, childcare and the importance of universal preschool for every child to help them be successful in life. His focus on the earned income tax, which really puts money back into working people's pockets, and so many of those issues. And he was one of the early advocates when our community said, put a homeless shelter in our backyard. So we have a real opportunity working with Ken, and with his counterpart, Delegate Boysko in Herndon, who is the newest member. They're bookends. So.
Yes, they are. And it's important because, one of the things that I didn't realize when I was working with another legislator, Chap Peterson's working on a bill to get legislation that would kind of prohibit HOAs from having covenants against home-based child care in their communities, as long as it's properly zoned, they're properly licensed, all of those things. But basically, and so Ken, I didn't realize until Ken told me that back in the 80s, he advocated and got passed a prohibition against HOAs keeping group homes out.
That's right.
You know, and that was something, but you know, I never connected. So I'm here working on this thing thinking it's so unique and different and whatever, and Ken's like, you know, I did that with group homes back in the 80s.
That's right, and watching trends over time and what matters in communities, and he's led the way and has taught us a lot about what to look for and what questions to ask.
And I think that's the other thing too about when you deliver direct services, there is a lot of history or expertise that county supervisors have, or delegates or people in the state legislature have, or the Herndon Town Council, or in our case Fairfax City. There are things that those legislators, policymakers have expertise in that could benefit, you know, the people who are delivering direct services.
And I think that is very true, or help us think of it in the policy framework. But I know the most important thing, what people say to us, to our board and our staff, is that they need the information from us. They really want to understand what is happening for working families, what are the needs that they have in terms of workforce development or affordable childcare, or what they're going to do when the cost of housing has gone so high and we don't have resources. So it's a relationship that I think goes both ways, and that's probably the most important thing that any nonprofit can do, and it's why embracing this idea of advocacy is it's really our opportunity to help educate, help provide real facts. And I know during debate on expanding Medicaid and closing the gap in Virginia, we could point to Ken's district, for example, and talk about nearly 33,000 individuals, seniors, veterans, young people coming out without health insurance, people who would benefit if Medicaid was expanded, and it made it very real for him and easy to then talk about back home and back in Richmond.
You know, and it's funny how things come up in places you don't know. I heard from Mike Collins this morning, who's running for the Reston Association, talking about the assessment for everybody in Reston being exactly the same, even for people who live in affordable housing. They're paying exactly the same assessment as somebody living in a huge McMansion. And he was saying that's a regressive, it's like a regressive tax. But you know something, there was no way I would have known that, or that was even an issue, or he's looking at how do we alleviate that for the people who live in Reston who are low income and living in low-income housing, right?
And I think that's something that we often miss. We do think, when we think about advocacy, for many people, it's just thinking about what happens down at the State House or what happens at the Fairfax County Government Center. But in cases like that, it's a perfect opportunity to go to the Reston Association Board to talk about the impact, how many neighbors are earning amount that they can't afford those assessments, and what can be done. So that's another way that I know Cornerstones has always been involved locally, is being involved in community organizations, helping to shape those policies, and it's been effective. When we get together, I'm on the board of the Greater Reston Chamber of Commerce, and we get together with other Reston serving organizations and find common ground for some of the issues we care about.
You know, that's interesting, because that's the first time that's really come up is chambers. Mm-hmm. And I talk all the time about chambers because I think they do amazing work, and I actually think they could do a lot more. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the Nova Chamber is making an effort to bring corporations together with nonprofits, because there's a lot of corporations that have people who want to volunteer and do community service work, and they don't know where or how to steer those employees. And I think there are nonprofits who would like to have board members that come from somebody. So I think Nova really is turning and again, you know, you said you came from the government relations for the American Cancer Society. Michael Forehand is the one, I know him as the government relations person, and Jen Siciliano, the government relations person from Inova. They are so involved and active through the chamber that this is how you reach these people.
It's absolutely, and the local chambers, certainly serving on the Public Policy Committee, what's a great opportunity there is that you're able to talk about housing that is affordable for a workforce, and if you're a business trying to bring people into town, they need to understand what it takes. So I have found, always had great reception from the chambers to be able to talk about education, housing, and in the context of what does that mean for economic development and a thriving community, because that's what we all want.
Absolutely, and I do think the chambers are very sensitive to that. But it's probably something, when I was talking with Lisa about how do we convene and bring people together. I mean, they are a convening organization, a facilitating, convening organization, and maybe it's something that we could get them to do a little bit more of for the chambers that aren't doing as much as some of the other chambers.
And I think you're right. They're starting to do that, and certainly, Mary Agee has been one that brought the nonprofits together over the years. When I first moved into this community, she helped me understand about broadening the groups of nonprofits, and she was the one that really helped lead the way, talking with chambers, talking with other partners about what we can do together and why it's important.
So how do you decide on advocacy? You're bigger than Britepaths, so we're small and we limit the things that we're going to focus on. But how do you decide what your advocacy goals are going to be?
It's a similar thing, and I think the things that Lisa talked about, at the heart for Cornerstones, we care about housing that is affordable, helping people find jobs that will pay them a wage that they can support their families, and really about not only just quality childcare, but what's happening for children and a future sort of beyond if their parents have experienced poverty. So we try to limit it to no more than 2 or 3 issues that our clients can talk about, that our board members are very engaged. Otherwise, there are too many things to get done, so we do try and focus.
And working collectively, so let's say whether it's with John Faust or it's with Ken Plum, do they come to you with ideas or suggestions, or do you bring issues to them and say this is something we really need your help with?
Both things are important, and what's most important is that happens outside of the legislative session and before. Right now, Fairfax County is about to look at its budget.
Right.
The most important work is after session, before session, and throughout the summer, where we're talking about the issues that we know are going to come up where we have time. We've had them come into our board meetings, working with Britepaths and Northern Virginia Family Service. We've brought our board members and our staffs together to talk with our legislators, and then we can share ideas and see what's important for them.
And I do think, too, that the chambers are pretty good about bringing our Northern Virginia legislative delegation together too at different points to try to understand what their focus is. Things like transportation, for instance, and you would think, and we don't really advocate for that, but a lot of the problems that people have in finding appropriate work is getting there.
Exactly.
The Centerville is a transportation desert.
That's right.
So that's why people can afford to live in Centerville, but they can't actually get to a job. And so I think our legislative delegation does a great job with bigger issues that impact our clients without us being advocates for, like, we need better public transportation.
Right.
And I do think the Chamber's doing great work on that.
I think that's good, and they're it's good to be able to provide an example of the shifts that someone who's working either a minimum wage job out at the airport or someone who's out in Centerville trying to get to Fairfax. We can provide some information about rapid transit and where that fits in public transportation, but they certainly have the expertise overall and know what's coming.
And that's great. And are you sometimes asked, like we were, to provide people who have stories or to provide testimony or real world for committee members?
That's the most important thing. It's real life, and again, it's where people find out, you're my neighbor, you're struggling, and here's what we can do together.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here, Kerri.
Thank you.
Please join us after the break. We're going to bring Mary Agee back on. We're going to talk about next steps and how you can be motivated, either as a volunteer, a donor, or just somebody who supports an organization, about nonprofit advocacy work.
Osama bin Laden calls getting nuclear weapons a religious duty.
Today, materials that can be used to make nuclear weapons are stored in more than 40 countries.
Sometimes protected by just a chain link fence.
Yet not enough is being done to lock down these materials
before terrorists steal them. Why did we learn all this?
My mother,
my son,
my sister-in-law
were all murdered September 11th.
Help protect America.
Together we can.
The stem cell issue is being debated throughout the country. Truth is, most everyone has an opinion, even if they don't know the facts.
Let's stop arguing and start really understanding the potential of stem cell research.
For us and for millions of Americans living with disabilities, get the facts.
Call 1-877-842-3442 for free information from the Stem Cell Research Foundation.
Following the tragic events of September 11th, there have been hundreds of violent attacks against innocent Americans.
Remember what that flag you're waving stands for.
Remember, please stop the hate.
We're stronger when we are united.
Remember what that flag you're waving stands for.
One nation under God.
Indivisible.
With liberty
And justice.
for all.
In America, there's either room for everyone or it's not America.
Don't pick the wrong fight.
Let's keep America land of the free.
Stop the hate.
Planning a home renovation? Put this at the top of your to-do list. Because after 10 years, none of you are protected against tetanus and another potentially fatal disease, diphtheria. A minor injury, such as a cut or a scrape, can put you at risk for a tetanus infection. And while safety gear offers some protection, an up-to-date vaccination called the TD booster is the best insurance against tetanus. So get the TD booster. If it's been 10, do it again.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Joining me in the final segment is Mary Agee. Thank you, Mary, so much for being here.
That's my pleasure.
So you got lots of accolades from both Lisa and from Kerri about the fact that you have been not just supporting Northern Virginia Family Service, where you were the executive director for many years, but you have done a lot of work in helping new executive directors and nonprofits who are just trying to get started in this area. You kind of help them find a way forward. And I think you deserve every bit of the accolades that you have gotten for that. So let's talk about going forward in 2017. What are some of the best practices, or how can we help? So let's say that somebody watching right now is not on the staff of a nonprofit. Let's say that they're not even volunteering right now, but let's say they write checks to a nonprofit. And they're wondering, well, is the nonprofit I'm writing checks to, are they doing advocacy work? How would a person approach a nonprofit and say, well, I'm kind of interested in if you're doing advocacy work around certain issues, and how maybe that's something else we could ask people to do as a way of supporting an organization?
That's a great perspective. I would say first, do your due diligence. I'd go to a website of that organization and just see, because usually you can tell from that if there's something that that organization is working on for policy. There's sometimes some special get to know your community sections, or here are the current bills we're following. It would give you a flavor. If not, I would simply get on the phone to either the executive director, or if there's a communications director, and ask the question. And I think they'd be thrilled, because that is a very specific ask that we should be making of our donors. If they want to go that extra step, we need every voice, or just to be able to read information about a topic. It was the Stephanie Berkowitz, the CEO at Northern Virginia Family Service. They have started a new practice, which I thought was brilliant. So they, once a quarter, have an issue-based Saturday activity. So for families, so for 2 hours, you can, for 1 hour, come out to a shelter for 2 hours. The first 20 minutes, there will be a presentation on the issues of homelessness in our community. And then you as a family can, for the next hour, do some hands-on volunteering, whether it's stocking food or whatever it might be. But you've been exposed to the issues, and you've learned some facts, and you've helped. I think it's a brilliant way to think about how you start having community members not only learn, but then to practice that, not by writing a check. I mean, that's great. Any nonprofit will welcome that, but how you can use that intellectual capital of this incredibly smart community we live in and put it to great use for so many people.
So this makes me, so you're talking about this, doing this for families, because I think there's a lot of families who do want to introduce their children to the concept of doing community work. Our public school systems here in Fairfax County definitely are very focused on community service hours. It's a requirement. You must do something in the community. That is a requirement for graduation, and it's a requirement because my kids had to do it at Fairfax High School. And so the schools are trying to get students to think in terms of what are you giving back? What are you doing? How are you investing in your community? But even younger children, and this very much hit home during the Women's March on Saturday. the number of people who brought their children from Pennsylvania, from Virginia Beach, from far away. They had driven, they'd taken a bus, and there were kids in strollers and on their parents' shoulders. And I'm thinking, goodness me, there's like 500,000 people here and you brought your children, but the kids were chanting, you know, little girls chanting with a call and response thing. And I'm thinking, what an amazing thing to do. Right. But there were people there of all ages. There were people there in wheelchairs and on canes and people who come from such a far distance. So should we be thinking in terms of segmenting ways to reach, let's say, millennials or college students as a way to talk with them about advocacy and how they can help with advocacy work? Because it seems to me college students, that would be something that they would say, well, that's something I can do because I know how to research and I know how to go online and I know how to organize and I know how to. And then newly retired people, I think the most underutilized segment of our community are people who are especially newly retired and don't know how to transition from going to work every day to finding something besides golf or gardening to do. And so how do we reach these people to say, there are so many organizations who would love your expertise on your schedule, however many hours you want to give. I don't know the best way to reach these different groups to say advocacy is something that you can help with.
Well, I think you've summed it up actually well, Catherine, because you have to have all sorts of different modes of communication. So social media is going to be, and is, a great way for the younger generations to communicate, to share information, to contact legislatures.
You have to meet them where they are, and that's where they are.
It's fantastic. And others, you know, definitely for people that are there any retired people anymore? But those that have some more time that might not want to do some of the traditional kinds of volunteering.
Right.
And want to exercise their brains. This is a great way that they can be able to do that by whether it's writing position papers, researching issues, just even making some appointments and going with you as a board member or a staff member. There's just, the sky's the limit as far as I'm concerned.
You know, one of the stories that sticks with me when my aunt retired from as an executive assistant, you know, that was her whole career. And she decided to volunteer at the hospital in her retirement. I mean, this was probably back in the 1980s. And so they had her pushing a wheelchair, pushing patients around, and she's like, I really hate this. So she went to them and said, look, I'm an executive assistant, and this is what I've done. I would just rather work in your business office. And so that's what she did. And she went in 3 days a week and worked in their business office because that's what she knew how to do. Yeah. She didn't want to push wheelchairs as a volunteer at the hospital. Right. And that's always stuck with me as somebody who basically said, I will volunteer for you, but for goodness sake, use the skills I have to help you better instead of giving me something unskilled. And so to me, for newly retired people, you have wonderful skills. I mean, valuable skills. Right. And if the whole idea is you want to do it on your schedule, at your pace, then we need to hook these people up with organizations that are like, we know you've got knowledge and connections and abilities, and I think advocacy would be a great place. I just need to figure out how to reach these people.
Well, you know, that's how, and I know many people have heard this from me, but it was through my father that I really got my passion. He was a major part of that with advocacy, because he always said, you know, he would write letters all the time to his state, local, state, and federal. And after he retired, he really communicated.
He had even more time to write to those folks.
And then we made the mistake of giving him a little word processor.
My mother had one too. Yeah,
like
email,
in his late
email machines.
80s.
Yeah, my mother had one.
So he was, I mean, there wasn't a week that went by that letters weren't flying out. But I loved it because he kept saying to me, I elected them. They need to hear what I have to say. And so it always resonated for me that passion of speaking up, that not waiting for someone else to do it, that's what nonprofits need to do.
And I think that was the message loud and clear at the Women's March, was that do something, have an action plan, 10 things, 100 days. But here's the thing. People are looking at that from a political mode, and I'm thinking to myself, and Kerri really hit on this, why don't you do something in your own community that affects people you know every day, that you see every day, that live next door to you, that ride the bus, that are at the library. So I would take that message of, you need an action plan, you need to let your elected officials hear from you, but don't just call about the big national issues. Call local people about the issues that affect, that you're familiar with, that you can see.
Right, exactly.
So we need to kind of co-opt the message and take it away from just Capitol Hill and Congress people, and we need to refocus it to like partner with a nonprofit and figure out what that nonprofit's trying to do. Figure out how to make your voice heard for something tangible where you know immediately whether you were able to do that thing or you weren't able to do that thing. You have to do it, and that's the other thing. Nothing happens overnight. You know this, you've been doing it longer than anyone's been doing it, but sometimes you keep running at it and you keep running at it and you keep running at it. Working with the Virginia Autism Project, it took forever for autism insurance reform, and then it was the cap was at 6 years old, and then the cap was at 10 years old, and there's legislation this year to crush the cap. Autism doesn't end at 10. And that's an organization that's an all-volunteer organization, but advocacy is what they do. But they understand. It's every year. It's every year. It's every year. And Ken with the EITC, the fully funded, he keeps going at it every year, every year. But getting people to understand that the power of their voice could be used for something where you can see the result and it affects your neighbors.
And especially at your local government. I mean, that is really imperative. And it's so easy, as Kerri talked, you can get access so easily. And to have those conversations. So I just hope we can find great ways to not only link individuals with the nonprofits, but make sure we continue to link businesses and the chambers, as Kerri brought up, because that really creates that force of nature to be able to make some changes that will better support the families in our communities. And that's really what it's about.
And and I think often too you get people who don't think that they're one letter, they're one phone call, they're
my goodness.
So talk about it, Mary. Tell the people that my one email, it's not going to make any difference. Shrug, shrug, shrug. It won't make any difference. Tell them.
Oh, it makes all the difference in the world. How many times have I been to a board member's office or down to General Assembly or even like into Jerry Connolly's office, and they'll say, Mary, stop the press, stop people from writing, stop people from calling, whatever it is. They do count. They can see when there's a number of people calling and not your form things.
Right.
Either emails or a phone call or even some letters. And I know most people are emailing and texting and so on.
But you can send snail mail. The post office is still working.
Absolutely. But it all counts. And I always think back to Delegate Jim Scott's first win.
Yes.
One vote. I always think about that when I think, I just don't have the energy to go out and vote. It's like one vote.
That made the difference.
We need to rise up and make sure we're heard.
Well, I agree with you, and I thank you so much for being here, because it's been so important, I think, to get nonprofit leaders who are actually out there doing the work in the community to explain to people that we need you. It's not just the one phone call or the one email. Nonprofits need you. Whether you think that you've got something, you don't know whether you've got something. So call them, send an email, go to their website, say, what can I do? How can I help? I want to be with you. And I would encourage everybody within the sound of my voice to please do that. Find the issue, find the organization, find the thing that you are passionate about, and go forward and advocate.